Good morning. Welcome to another fresh edition of your program, Inside Nigeria. Incidentally, today is the last day in the month of July, Thursday, July 31, 2025. Welcome once again. My name is Winifred Ugbebo, and on today's show, we are looking at what the papers are saying, including Nigeria's most influential leadership. And of course, let's go to leadership and see what is offering on its menu this Thursday. Leadership's leading story says patients stranded as nurses midwives strike hits hospitals nationwide. The story continues on page 4 of the paper. Patients stranded as nurses midwives strike hits hospitals nationwide. Underneath that leading story, we have pictures of flood. We have flood, 8 buildings collapse, graveyard submerged in Borno. The story for the picture continue on page 4 of leadership. We have some flooded areas in Maiduguri, Borno State yesterday. Photos, Francis Okoye, Maiduguri. These are pictures gracing the cover of yesterday, talking about flooding in Borno yesterday. Still on leadership, 6 children die in Jigawa boat accident. Coca-Cola to sell Chivita, Hollandia to a UAC. North has no regrets supporting Tinubu Bagudu. Traditional Council, no plans to make Sultan Oni permanent co-chairman, says Esunukbe. Coalition is not about Articles 2027 ambition, ADC. Recapitalization, UBA opens 157.85 billion naira rights issue. We move towards the masthead of leadership. Communal clash in Gwagwalada leaves 1 dead, 31 houses burnt. That story continues on page 8 of the paper. Communal clash in Gwagwalada, that is outskirts of Abuja, leaves 1 dead, 31 houses burnt. And on the business boss, LCCI orders slam NNPCS no-say decision on Port Harcourt refinery. That is on the business boss of leadership newspaper. Stakeholders in the country's oil and gas sector have disagreed with the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, on its decision not to sell the Port Harcourt refining company, PHRC, but to complete its high-grade rehabilitation and maintain national ownership. NNPC Group CEO Bashir Ojulari announced at a town hall meeting in Abuja that ongoing technical and financial reviews of the Port Harcourt, Kaduna, and Warri refineries deemed the sale of PHRC unlikely, warning that selling now will lead to further value erosion. These are excerpts from the business story on the business boss on the cover of leadership newspaper this Thursday. And of course, it's also a leading story in some of the papers we have on our lineup this Thursday. Moving out of the masthead of leadership, only Tinubu can end Zamfara insecurity, not Governor Lawa, says Shinkafi. IBB demands laws to guarantee democratic dividends. These are stories gracing the cover of leadership this Thursday. Let's move to the page 3 of the paper where we have our stand. And today's stand is on time to rethink our border security. Time to rethink our border security. The Chief of Defense Staff, CDS, General Christopher Musa, recently called for the fencing of Nigeria's borders to boost national security. His call couldn't have come at a more urgent moment as the country struggles with persistent security challenges in the northwest and other regions. General Musa, in his remarks, pointed out that several countries have resorted to fencing their borders due to escalating insecurity. He cited Pakistan and Saudi Arabia as examples. Pakistan fencing its border with Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia fortifying its boundary with Iraq to stem militant infiltration and safeguard their territories. Let's move towards the newspaper stand in the stand. And it says the strategic importance of rethinking border security cannot be overstated. Yes, fencing will be costly, but the cost of doing nothing, of leaving our borders open to militants, traffickers, and smugglers is far greater. This newspaper firmly supports General Musa's call. Nigeria cannot afford to delay. Border fencing will not be the final word in securing the nation, but it must be the first line. These are excerpts today from today's stand in Leadership newspaper. Time to rethink our border security. From our stand, we move over to the back page of the paper where we have Being Blunt with Muazu Elize. Muazu Elize is writing this Thursday on Ghana's Nigeria Must Go protest. Ghana's Nigeria Must Go protest. Of course, it's no longer news that in faraway, of course, in close Ghana, neighboring Ghana, there's also already a xenophobic attack against Nigerians, with some of them being killed and some of their workplaces set ablaze. And in quote from today's Being Blunt with Muazu Elize, he says this growing hostility toward Nigerians in Ghana is dangerous and must be checked immediately. Before we leave the back page, let's go to Ghana Must Go, because it's now from Ghana, it's now Nigeria Must Go. It's funny. INEC says quality of local government elections still low. And of course, Ghana Must Go asks, since when? Maybe it's just, INEC is just discovering that. It's on this note we conclude review of front headline stories and inside stories today on Leadership newspaper. We move to the next paper we have on our lineup this Thursday. Let's move over to Blueprint newspaper. Blueprint has the story on there, the business story on there, leadership, and that is on NNPCL. It says NNPCL rules out sale of Port Harcourt refinery, reaffirms commitment to full rehabilitation. NNPCL rules out sale of Port Harcourt refinery, reaffirms commitment to full rehabilitation. Auction 2026, INEC frets over 360,794 uncollected PVCs. And the second leading story on Blueprint newspaper this Thursday, the last day of the month of July, says how North's fiscal position works stronger under Tinubu regime, coming from Bagudu. Cites huge critical infrastructure across states, says allocations rose by over 340%. Federal government states debt dropped by 33.4%. Second leading story today on Blueprint newspaper. These are kickers to that second story. How North's fiscal position works stronger under Tinubu regime, coming from Bagudu. Cites huge critical infrastructure across states, says allocations rose by over 340%. Federal government states debt dropped by 33.4%. Still on Blueprint newspaper, we move towards the masthead. We are committed to protecting press freedom, coming from Idris, the Minister of Information. Kayamo host Mofi Qatari investors sector eyes investment boost. And in sports, CHAN home-based Super Eagles seek win against Zanzibar. Is on that note we conclude review of Blueprint newspaper this Thursday. For more, log into the website of Blueprint newspaper as we move to the next paper, and that is Vanguard. Vanguard is still talking Port Harcourt refinery issue coming from NNPCL. It says operating Port Harcourt refinery ahead of full turnaround, ill-informed, coming from NNPCL. Rules out sale of refineries. $18 billion spent on 3 refineries, term orders so far. That is turnaround maintenance term orders so far. That story is on page 5 of Vanguard. Operating Port Harcourt refinery ahead of full turnaround, ill-informed. That is the view of the CEO of NNPCL. Other stories gracing the cover of Vanguard. Nigeria was heading for 12 trillion naira subsidy debts, PCNGI. Nigeria was heading for 12 trillion naira subsidy debts, PCNGI. Phantom coup, Labour Party alleges harassment of leaders. Presidency SADC chair Bika over alleged ministerial bribe offer. And in sports, my generation was robbed, coming from Patience Avre, ex-Super Falcons skip player. My generation was robbed. Oh, That's so unfortunate. Maybe that time it was just a golden handshake, but now this time it went beyond the golden handshake. She says, my generation was robbed. From that sports item, we move to the stories about the masthead of Vanguard. First Bank grows earnings by 18.1% to 1.6 trillion naira. Mixed reactions to INEC's verdict on local government polls. Hospital services disrupted as nurses strike enters day 3. Negotiations continue tomorrow. IDP's protest in Benue block Makurdi Lafia Road. With that, we conclude review of front headline story on Vanguard newspaper this Thursday. For more, log into www.vanguardngr.com. From Vanguard, we move over to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is the Daily Times. The Daily Times leading story today is also on the NNPCL story. It says Port Harcourt refinery not for sale, and that story is on page 2 of the Daily Times. Minister Bianca Ojukwu hosts talks in Ghana over bilateral tensions. Federal government moves cattle breeding centers in 6 geopolitical zones, Agric Minister. Adaliku rally support for Nigeria's bid for IMO Council seat. Aviation Ministry, MOFI to collaborate on sector's development. NAFDAC earned 2.5 billion naira from Lagos, Onitsha, Aba drug market raid. These are leading stories on the cover of the Daily Times this Thursday. And with that, we move to just above the masthead, where we have a single story there. Nurses begin 7-day warning strike, and that story continues on page 8 of the Daily Times. It's on that note, we also conclude review of front headline stories on the paper this Thursday. For more, log into www.dailytimesng.com. From Daily Times, we move over to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is The Punch. The Punch has a different story entirely on his cover, but it's still on petroleum issues. Federal government eyes 796 billion naira annually from 5% petrol surcharge. Consumers decry new fuel tax after subsidy removal as law commences January 2026. Federal government eyes 796 billion naira annually from 5% petrol surcharge. Consumers decry new fuel tax after subsidy removal as law commences January 2026. And just like every other paper before it, The Punch, also one of the stories on the cover, says Port Harcourt refinery not for sale from NNPC. Varsity students to face drug test, says Education Minister. Abiodun welcomes PDP chair, orders to Ogun APC. Government stab Ogun businessman to death. Kings must respect ancestral burial rights or quit throne. One day, Abibola, that is Professor Abibola. That story runs on page 3 of the Punch newspaper. Kings must respect ancestral burial rights or quit throne. Coming from One Day Abibola. We move to the masthead. UTME fraud, JAMB prosecuted 110 in 5 years. And above the masthead, patients groan as nurses strike grants hospitals nationwide. Federal government to hold high-level meeting with nurses Friday. Head workers insist on improved pay orders. That story is on page 2 of the Punch. Reps probe Nigerian minors abuse claim in CAR. That story continues on page 7 of the Punch, even as we bring to a close the review of front headline stories of Punch newspaper this Thursday. For more, log into the website of Punch newspaper. We move to the last paper we have on our lineup, and that is The Guardian. The Guardian, just like Punch, has different story entirely as its main cover. It says suspended school feeding initiative leaves 9 million pupils, 250,000 jobs stranded. Is a leading story, a big story on page 6 that continues on page 6 of The Guardian. Suspended school feeding initiative leaves 9 million pupils, 250,000 jobs stranded. We have an illustration, as usual, beneath that leading story. It says before its suspension in January 2024, the program had created about 34,864 direct jobs for cooks and other staff involved in the food preparation and distribution process. It indirectly supports the livelihoods of an estimated 80,000 farmers, 127,000 food vendors, and 100 aggregators across 30 states. Illustration beneath that leading story. Of course, we also have a graph, or is it pie chart? We have pepper, beans, noodles, carton, spaghetti, semovita, chicken, tomatoes, rice, and gari, all illustrated beneath the leading story on today's The Guardian. 2027, Rufai reveals PDP in talks with OB for major return. Ministry, NDLEA OK compulsory drug tests for undergraduates. Nurses begin warning strike over poor conditions, leave patients stranded. TCM board reaffirms corporate governance standards, force prolonged tenure of interim directors. Saudi to expand operations in Nigeria with TransBlue partnership. We move towards the masthead of The Guardian. Earlier dissolves cabinet, appoints Ataga as new chief of staff. Marginalization, North's fiscal position stronger under Tinubu, says Bagudu. NNPCL suspends sale of refinery, exports 400,000 MT of refined products. That story continues on page 7 of The Guardian. And that also concludes the review of front headline stories on The Guardian this Thursday. Don't forget to log into the website of The Guardian, www.guardian.ng. Well, viewers, on this note, we've come to the end of today's Inside Nigeria breakfast show on Leadership Television. Don't forget to join us same time, same station for another fresh edition of the program. Don't also forget to join us on this station for news on the hour. My name is Winifred Uwebo. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word. Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word. Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word. Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact